Sam, great. Okay, so welcome. Just gonna get going here. So the structure of this presentation today is just we're going to do an introduction to average daily attendance and how funding is affected or tied to your ADA. The second section is we're going to talk about qualifiers for ADA collections, things that like you as an attendance manager or someone who's overseeing the attendance kind of have to have eyes on to ensure that like as you're moving forward and claiming ADA, that some of the programmatic stuff are monitored and managed properly so that you can ensure at the time that you're claiming ADA that it's properly and ready to be claimed. We're going to then talk about, once you have all that data ready, like what are some of the reporting cycles and audit things to consider, tasks to consider.
Yesterday.
So that you can ensure that, all the information that you have is submitted to the state or your authorizers in a timely manner. And then just the last section is really around like things to consider. You don't necessarily own these programs, you're not the program manager, but there are rules that kind of affect how the program is run or structured that may affect how you report your ADA in regards to submitting it to the state for funds to fund your school program. Okay, so we'll start really at a really basic level here. What ADA or what is ADA? It's your average daily attendance, and it's the total number, like at the fundamental level per student. It's how many days the student showed up to you at the school divided by the number of instructional days that your school offered services to the community that you're serving. So if you offer 175 instructional days that in your academic calendar, that will be your denominator here. And then if the student showed up and had perfect attendance and they showed up for the entire 175 days, that'll be your numerator, and you get one ADA for that child. Generally speaking, what historically has been a good average to consider is about 95% or 0.95 on your ADA. But after COVID, we've seen that number kind of dip a little bit in terms of estimates for ADA, in which schools are accounting for, just regular illnesses or like students not showing up. But at the fundamental base level, this is the calculation that everything kind of rolls up into. Okay? So how does ADA affect your budget? I just wanted to kind of share this up front. Essentially, this slide, if you haven't seen this slide before, I really want you to focus in on column E. Column E is how much money the state of California is going to fund your school with for every ADA earned. So for this year, if we read this particular table here, you get, if you have a TK through third grade student attending your school and they showed up every single day of the school year, you're going to get $10,951, right? And it is a change, and it roughly comes out to about $62 for every day a student shows up to school that is in grades TK through 8th grade. Okay, the high school level, grades 9 through 10 or 12, you get a little bit more money from the state because the state requires you to provide more instructional minutes and provide more services to that grade span there. So you get roughly like $70 a day for every day that the high school student shows up to school. Okay. Other takeaways here is that like we do see increase in the COLA, cost of living adjustment here of 8.22% from the prior year. So this is just like, if anyone bought, the example I've been sharing in my school, that anyone bought eggs for $15 a dozen or something like that. I think this 8.22% kind of helps with that price jump there. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's gone up in price as well. I know from my perspective, I've seen that. So this COLA adjustment is pretty high in relation to historic COLA adjustments here. The other piece to kind of take away here is this transitional TK. You see an extra $1,000 for TK through 3rd grade. This is really to help the schools and the state schools support the state's initiative of trying to move forward and make TK more broadly available to younger students here. So you see a little bit of an increase in funding there for your ADA at the TK through 3rd grade level. Okay. I'll move on to the next one here, the next slide here. And again, like these 2 slides here, the previous slide and this slide, probably represent 90% of the funding that your school gets to fund your operations, right? So we have your supplemental grant, we have your concentration grant on top of that, like $70 per student or $62 per student a day. So these are your unduplicated counts. You know, if they're an EL student, free and reduced, homeless, or migrant and such, like you get an extra 20% of dollars applied to like that $70 at a high school level. So if the student receives or is part of that program, you get a little bump in your funding there. And the philosophy or the understanding there is that these students require additional services from the school so that they can engage in the educational services that you're providing. So therefore you get an extra 20%. Now the state also has a concentration grant, and that just means if your school has a really high number of EL students or any combination of EL students, free and reduced lunch and such that represents 55% or more of your population, the state will give you another 65% on top of the base grant on the previous slide. So what does this translate to, and what's the takeaway here? If you are predominantly operating or supporting like a high needs population, the state could potentially give you an additional 85% of funding in addition to the base grant that's shown here, okay? How does that tie to ADA? It really is just the multiplier, right? So if the kid shows up or the student shows up 1.0, you're gonna get 1 times the numbers that are being shown here, okay? So just know, and I made the assumption that, oh, it's just like a 0.1 or a 0.2, it's slightly off. And I didn't quite understand the magnitude of the change, but it could be 0.1 or like 10% of $15,000. It could be 15% of, $15,000 or $18,000. So just wanted to kind of let you all know that that's how the numbers and the budget and the ADA kind of flow together and are connected here. Okay. And those are the numbers for this year. So a little bit extra money to fund your operations here. Okay. Qualifiers for ADA connection or collection is the next slide here or section here. So you can claim, traditional ADA where students come to school and they're sitting in class, and that's pretty straightforward. But there are scenarios where you can claim additional ADA, and it requires kind of a different handling of that information or of that program. So we have here, things to consider. We're going to talk about independent studies and that program. We're going to talk about the extended school year because some students have to go beyond the 175 days or 180 days to complete their education program at your school. And we'll talk a little bit about like some of the age limitations in the TK program here. But really what this particular section represents is some of the learnings that we gathered through our support of our schools. We work with 30 plus schools or so, and we really, some of the things that we've learned from them, we wanted to share some of the experiences and what we walked them through as well, and we think it could benefit the broader community here. So within the independent studies, we'll start here. We reached out to the California Department of Education and we asked them, are there any changes to how in the independent studies program is to be operated this year? Their response is there are no changes to the 23-24 school year in regards to how to manage the independent studies program. I think they probably, like I'm guessing here, but I'm thinking that they felt pretty bad that, hey, we all the California schools went through 2 years, 3 years of COVID and all these changes and regulations in regards to implementing an independent studies program. And they just said, let's just give all California schools like 1 year reprieve from any changes here. So definitely appreciate that, because it's been there's been a lot of changes, as all of you all are probably aware, in terms of standing an independent studies program at your school. But they did follow up that with that response, saying that there are a lot of changes that are being proposed in the coming July 2024 timeframe there. So there is a link on the website, and the link is also like placed here on this PowerPoint presentation here, that you can actually go in and find the document that has all the updated language that they're evaluating right now. So if you are operating a school that is pretty dependent, or that has a strong or big independent studies program, you may want to properly position yourself by reviewing some of the edits that the state board or California Department of Education state board are evaluating at this point in time, and how it would affect your program here. Okay. And here's just a little snippet of what that looks like in some of the changes that they're making here. So the current guidelines, just a reminder for everyone, you need to have a master agreement to generate ADA. So there's a difference there with short-term and long-term ADA, and the date is 15 days, right? So if it's less than 15 days, it's considered short-term. If it's more than 15 days, it's considered long-term. And the main difference there is, if you're doing a short-term contract, you can get started right away. You can provide services to the student right away, and you have 10 days to get all the appropriate signatures to round out that master agreement with that student. If it's 15 days or more, you want to make sure that you have all the signatures in place before you actually start services or providing IS services or instruction to the student. Okay. There are things just like still to consider. It's not really like attendance specific, but it's more like independent studies program management specific. So, things to talk to your IS program manager about, or just, hey, the ADA to FTE ratio. Essentially, you want to make sure that like there's a 25 student to 1 certificated employee ratio that's being met. Otherwise, you could get dinged and or financially penalized for not meeting that ratio. You also want to there's also a bunch of other ratios, so you want to make sure that you don't exceed 20% of your total ADA to classroom based ADA ratio. So if you do exceed the 20%, you have to have like a letter of funding determination. So you, as the attendance manager, you really want to monitor some of these ratios here. And if you don't control it, or it's outside of your realm of control, make sure you talk to the folks who are running the program. There's an interesting item here in regards to, there's a 10% cap on any school that is providing continuation education or an opportunity education model. Typically, a continuation education model it's usually for like students that are like 16 years or older, who don't really graduate. It's an alternative to a high school diploma. So they need a lot of support, and the state doesn't want you to provide more than 10% of that support through independent studies. And then similarly for opportunity education providers, like, they typically have like specialized curriculum, or they need like guidance counselors, or like psych services or tutorial assistants or what have you. Again, that's a more like fine-tuned, like narrow way of providing services to students. And again, the state doesn't want you to provide more than those services in a way via independent studies, but in more than like a 10% ratio there. Okay. And then we did have like some instances where schools were trying to generate multiple days of ADA because they had like overlapping independent studies contracts and everything. So just be mindful of that. You can only claim one per day. Okay. Continuing on with some of the independent studies reminders as it relates to attendance. So like, students that are over 21 years of age can't generate ADA through IS. Pupils who have not been continuously enrolled. So this means like as soon as they turn 18, what's the trigger here? If they're continuously enrolled at your school, you can keep treating them like a student, like a minor, and continue to provide services that way. But the moment they disenroll or unenroll from your school, they kind of get funneled into like the adult ed track, right? They need to go and find like adult ed opportunities. You can't like kind of provide the same level of services that you were providing to like a 5th grade senior or something like that anymore. Okay. Students, if you have students that are on an IEP and they want to go into an independent studies master agreement, you want to make sure that you have that language written into the student's IEP. So again, if you're just kind of the person running the reports, you may want to check in with the SPED director or the resource specialist to ensure and ask those follow-up questions if you see that a student is has a learning disabilities or what have you, and then you need to collect ADA via IS. Home and hospital, this one is an interesting one because if the student is like disabled or they need to earn ADA or they're just kind of bedridden or need to be in a facility, you want to really consider whether or not you want to do like a home and hospital type of learning program for them or an IS program for them. Some folks tend to kind of conflate the two. So you can, but the bar for home and hospital ADA is much lower than the bar for IS ADA. Home and hospital, you pretty much only have to have like one instructional hour to get 1 full days of credit. Whereas IS, the recommendation is if the student can do 20 to 30 hours a week of work, then you could potentially recommend an IS master agreement to support them while they're kind of bedridden at home or at the hospital. But generally speaking, you probably want to go with the home and hospital education program because it's just a lower bar to collect ADA for that support there. Community day school pupils are not eligible for IS, so if you are one providing those services or you're a school that is providing those services like that, you won't be able to provide IS it via IS here. Okay. Students that are expelled or suspended, but for me, like most of the time, it was like students who were suspended. Schools were all still, because you don't get ADA, some schools that we worked with were still trying to assign like an IS packet to the student while they were suspended so that they can reclaim ADA, and you're not allowed to do that. So essentially, if they're suspended, they won't get any services from the school while they're suspended from your program there. The next item here is, I guess this is kind of like I probably should have like put it as like an indentation to the 10% continuation and opportunity school here, but this particular 10% threshold, it does not apply, and this is kind of more nuanced. So if the student is pregnant or like parenting, and or like as they're the primary caregiver for someone at their house or what have you. So this is a nuanced one. If you have a student who is in a continuation or an opportunity educational program and he or she is pregnant, they don't count towards that like 10% gap there. So just be mindful. I think most of the schools, some of the schools that we work with have at least 1 or 2 instances of this. Okay. So that's independent studies, just kind of like a reminder for the school year, things to consider as you're kind of working and developing and running your reports and checking your ADA figures and such. The next item here is about TK, Transitional kindergarten. This year, the state has extended. It was like any student who turned 5 between September 2nd and February 2nd last year were like eligible for TK. Now they've added 2 more months, so now it's April 2nd. And as you can see, the trend is going to occur for this particular like expansion is going to take place over the next 3 years. So this year, any student who turns 5 by April 2nd or after September 2nd will be eligible to be in your TK program. What does this date mean? Really, this date means if the student turns 5 between this date range, you can claim ADA from the day the student enrolled at your school. Okay, from the very first day the student enrolled at your school. If the student turns 5 after April 2nd, then you can only claim ADA for the days after they turned 5. Okay, so this particular gap here that can be a big difference in how much money you'll get. Like, is it a different? Like you can go back, get your $62 a day from the beginning of the school year, or just starting from April 2nd, and so that's something to be mindful of. You'll see that it'll expand to June 2nd next year, and then in 2025, 2026, it's going to be available to all students who turn 4 by September 1st of the following of that year. Okay, so something to be keep an eye out for. And then I just put these 2 slides or these 2 links here to help out folks or schools that, because there's a whole bunch of program requirements for the TK program, like TK to teacher ratio. I forget what I think it's like 12 to 1. You have to have like 12 TK students to 1 dedicated certificated staff member. You have to have a certain number of like the average class size needs to be at a certain level. So these particular resources here, go ahead and if you haven't shared it, or if your TK program manager hasn't looked at it, probably share this with them. It has a whole lot more information on how to run the TK program and things to consider, but for your purposes, you want to just make sure that they're falling within age and you treat them a certain way based on how you collect ADA. But there's also kind of these peripheral rules that the program manager needs to follow as well. And I would suggest just kind of using these 2 links here to talk it over with them. Okay. All right. So the next one here that it's kind of like doesn't happen that often, but when it does, people ask like, how do we treat this? And it really is the non-public school attendance procedures here. So typically, if a student needs to go to a non-public or private school, the school will engage in a contract with a vendor, and that vendor will then be responsible for providing services to that student. Generally, it's not a wash. Like, you might get $70 a day from the state for that student, but the services, but the vendor will likely charge you a lot more than that because they're like specialized services, is what I find. But generally speaking, if you do have any like NPS, non-public school attendance data that you're collecting, we have to treat that a certain way. And typically what we find that it's the most useful is vendors or service providers who give you like an invoice that has some student level detail and some attendance level detail in there as well. So they'll tell you how many days the student was present, how many days they were absent, and so forth. And then you as the attendance manager would need to calculate that NPS ADA and report it differently to the state when it comes time for the P1, P2, or PA reporting periods. Okay. I guess I can, like, the next section here is just auditing and reporting. But before I kind of jump in, wanted to just take a moment to pause and ask the group if you have any questions over about some of the slides that I've gone over this far. And I'll just give it a moment, see if anyone kind of lights up the chat here.
Hey, Varik, we have a question from Phineas. It says, can a school return to a traditional IS?
Yes, so I think schools can surely, you have like traditional IS and you also have like course-based IS as well. But so I would say, yeah, at this point in time, you can return to your traditional IS. Okay.
We're getting some more questions in here. Divya has asked, do we report attendance for NPS students?
Yeah, so you have to kind of treat that differently. And you should, if you do have NPS, you should be collecting that evidence or those invoices from the vendors. And then we would just have to calculate it. Kind of, it's usually such a small amount that we do it like manually. I do typically do it manually. But it does need to be segmented out from your regular ADA.
Awesome. There was a conversation earlier on in the chat, and you can speak to this, or if Kim, if you want to hop in, about home and hospital. There seems to be a conversation going on whether or not charters are able to assign H&H. Do you have any insight on that?
I was looking.
Yeah.
I was looking for the ed code specifically for that, but I recall it, and I actually had emails with and conversations with JC Ragland at the CDE, who monitors home hospital and some of the other programs. And she said that if you read the regulations, it specifies that county offices of education and school districts can offer home and hospital, but she said because it doesn't specifically list charter schools, like you'll see in other ed code, it'll include charter schools in a list of eligible entities to do something. Because charter schools are not specifically listed, they are excluded from being allowed to offer home and hospital. It has to be done through the district based on either where they're living or in any kind of facility that they're in order to participate in home and hospital. But that doesn't preclude charter schools from, if they're only doing home and hospital part of the week, they can still be enrolled and get attendance for the charter school the other days of the week that they're not doing home and hospital.
And I think like it's more of it, and it's more of like what's best for the child on that front. Like the recommendation typically was, if the student can do the 20 to 30 hours, it's probably recommended that you do the IS and take the IS approach, because it's like all of those issues there are kind of valid in regards to what you shared there, Kim. And that's how you would kind of maximize your ADA. But if the student is kind of like can only do 1 hour of ADA or what have you, or 1 hour of instruction per day, the rules are like, for home and hospital, if it's 1 hour a day equals 1 day's worth of ADA, you can claim at most like 5 days a week and no more than the number of regular school days that are available or that are provided by the district or the school. But and those are really like special cases. And we do help, and I didn't necessarily get into the details here, but what we do is we do help our schools kind of navigate and come to like a good decision in regards to what the right education program should look like or be tailored to support the child, while trying to balance like the need to maximize ADA to support your school.
I think the point was that charter schools cannot collect ADA for home and hospital specifically. That's what JC told me at the CDE. So I just wanted to make sure that, because I know some special ed departments at charter schools, including my own and someone else's, have said, well, we have to offer home and hospital, but if we can't collect ADA, you can do home and hospital, we just can't collect funding for those specific days.
Yeah. So
we just don't want to get in trouble with the auditor.
Got it. Yeah, no, perfectly clear. Yeah. So there's a bunch of different things to consider if you're working with attendance. So like, part of this presentation here is just to kind of say like, hey, that attendance manager, your attendance people that are working at your school, they have to have some purview into all of the nuances of how education services can be provided to students, and these are some of the special cases that they need to consider or probe more deeply into to determine whether or not they can claim ADA at the time where like all you're seeing and reporting is like the ADA numbers on the P1 and P2s and such. But yeah, but thank you, Kim. Okay, cool. On this one here, I think we'll move on here. I think we'll talk about reporting cycles here. We have the P1, P2, PA. Everyone is fairly familiar with that. The way that the state funds us is like the first, you pretty much get about like 9% of your money for the first half of the school year or the subsequent school year based on what you reported in your PA time period there, or the prior year. Things that folks might need to navigate through are like the J13 emergency closure forms. So if you have a school closure, there was like the Hurricane Hillary, we had a number of our clients, our schools kind of decide to shut down operations for the day in anticipation of that. So if you don't want to take a hit on your ADA and you want to kind of reclaim some of that funding, you can go through a process called the J13 form. It's a form that requires some backup that you provide, board approval, and then ultimately sent up to the state for approval as well, so that they can just kind of put a placeholder there based on what you normally would have gotten in ADA versus filling in a zero for that day. So that's one thing to consider if you throughout the school year, if you do have an emergency closure. Do consider a J13 form to recoup those funds. Otherwise, you might need to work with your authorizer to like adjust your calendar, your official calendar, so to make up for the missed school day there. Okay. For schools that have PENSEC, meaning like you have a significant expansion, you're adding a new school, you're adding a new grade level. The fundamental understanding here is that if you're adding that grade level, you're adding that new school, you're going to need a little bit more like upfront money to fund your operations, to hire new teachers, buy additional supplies to stand up that grade level. So the state will give you money upfront and then to support that stand-up effort. But you do have to, after the 20th day of instruction, you have to actually provide them actuals at that point in time. So they want to know what is your actual ADA versus your estimated ADA. Okay. Revisions and changes. This is kind of what we have here. There's a website that I can share with you all. But these are the 2 months, or October is when the upcoming month and when some of the deadlines are due. So if you have any revisions or ADA corrections for your 2021 school year, or for your 21-22 school year, you have until October 2nd to submit your audit adjustments via the PADC site and get it all approved by your authorizers and such. And then you also have your adjustments, your audit adjustments that you can put in, and these typically come from your audit findings or something like that as well. Okay. Your extended school year here, this is typically like a PA piece here. Typically, like, if you only run your school year runs for like 175 days, but there's an IEP or something that requires a student to extend the school year by 20 days. It's a minimum of 20 days. But if you have to extend your school year by 20 days, then in those instances, you have to take the number of days that the student was present past the 175 days, and then just divide that by 175. I did ask the CDE, like, what if a school offers like 180 days, 185 days in the school year? They said it doesn't matter. The extended school year calculation is always based on 175 days. Yeah. So this is typically something that we see with some of our clients or our school sites, that they do have an extended school year for a contract or education program for their students, but they're not really claiming the dollars here. But that's something that you just kind of want to consider in terms of your reporting cycle for PA. Okay. For auditing, the state the state has essentially like a zero tolerance for audit findings. So if you're off, if your monthly attendance or your calculations are off by like 0.1 or what have you, typically the general suggestion here is that they report that as a finding, mainly because it's just really like critical to how the state funds schools here. So what can you do to ensure that you're best prepared for your audits? Just if you can do weekly teacher signatures on their attendance reports, that would be great. You have your monthly ADA and student detail reports, kind of keep those on file. Typically the state wants, the auditors want to see the monthlies, and they'll pick a sample month to dig into. You want to, if you're providing IS or independent studies, you want to ensure that you have like work samples, your policies, your board approved policies, your master agreement procedures and such, and how their students are going to produce work and get graded on and such. You want to make sure that that's all in place. Date of birth verification documentation, just ensuring that again they're within that, they turned 5 before that, before the April or May 2nd date there, so that you can collect proper ADA. And then we did run into some issues, and again, this is a completely different program that might be related to your health program at your school, but immunization compliance. There are a number of shots that the vaccines that the students have to get before you can admit them into your school. If there are like conditional, like a conditional admission process, where if the student gets like the first of a series of shots, and then you work with the school or the student or family to ensure that they have a game plan to get the remaining shots, you can kind of conditionally admit them into the school and collect ADA. But if they don't have the shots and you don't have that kind of paperwork, the auditors can ask that you kind of back out that ADA that was earned, that you've been like reporting on behalf of students who did not have all the proper vaccines there. So I would say takeaway there is, if you're unsure of the different tiers of how you can collect ADA from students who don't have all of their shots, they're like the California Department of Health does maintain some resources on their website specific to K-12. We're happy to help you if you need support in this area as well. Okay. The independent studies ratio, I think we shared, like it's 25:1 student to teacher ratio. So as you're collecting ADA, you just want to make sure that you have that ratio in place. Otherwise, you could get dinged and they could ask you to pay money back. And then lastly, like the 20-80% rule. So only a maximum of 20% of your ADA can be collected through independent studies in relation to your overall ADA. So if you exceed 20%, you'll likely need to get like a letter of funding determination and approved by the State Board of Education, so that you can collect any ADA that's above and beyond the 20% there. Okay. And this last section here really is just like things to consider. And there's not really like your attendance program itself, but just things that happen outside of attendance that folks may reach in and ask you about for attendance data to support some of the engagement work that they're trying to do to bring the students back into the school site. So SIS attendance setup. So you have any code changes or any requirements that you need to track that's specific to your student population, procedures for students on medical leave. Are there any travel blackout dates? So like we know when the P1, the P2, the PAs are due, when reports need to be signed. Key stakeholders, like, are they aware that maybe we need some of their support during those times to ensure that we properly submit and certify your data? You will most likely have a SARB at your school, so like an attendance board. So they're supposed to kind of monitor and have meetings with students who are a bit habitually truant, So you may want to kind of engage with that group, ask them if they're getting what they need from you, if you are setting up your system in support of their policies and what they're hoping to accomplish with that group there. There have been questions around acceptable notes, what are acceptable excuses and so forth. So, you know, how would you log that in? Now it's, you know, you can take phone calls, you can take emails, notes, all the traditional items, but there it did expand. So you do want to have a process or procedure in place to actively collect any of those excuses from parents and such. Yeah. If you don't have a no-show policy, you may want to kind of visit that so that it's pretty clear when a student doesn't show up for 10 days, 14 days in a row at the beginning of the school year or what have you, like how do you treat that and get pretty clear on how to, you know, no shows and when they occur, which they do occur quite a lot at the beginning of the school year. So, and then this last item on this slide here is just the number of instructional minutes that you have to provide. So every grade span has like a certain number of instructional minutes that you want to provide. It's not really like attendance related, but it is like a multiple of attendance in regards to, like, you know, if the student showed up for 175 days, like how many actual instructional minutes were provided each day. And if you don't meet the minimum instructional minutes, the state could kind of come back to you and ask for some dollars back there. Yeah. We talked a little bit about immunization records, and then the lunch program. It might, you know, you may want to just kind of, again, like make the connection and make the link and let folks know that, hey, the data that you all are providing and submitting into CalPads and for the unduplicated percentage count, like that is one part of the LCFF funding formula. But the ADA that I produce from the attendance management perspective is the other component of that equation. And like the work that we're doing together and the data that we're producing has a significant impact on the funding that we're going to get from the school or from the state. Okay. I do have here on this particular slide here, just the number of instructional minutes that are required. So if you don't have, if you haven't done this before, I suggest, you know, kind of seeing if somebody in the school has eyes on this. But, you know, for example, you know, 9th through 12th grade, you have 64,800 instructional minutes. So your bell schedule and all the permutation combination of, you know, minimum days, shortened days, holidays, pupil free days, all that stuff, like it still needs to add up to 64,800 minutes for the high school. And that number kind of decreases as the grade levels get lower and lower here. So I'm going to provide this slide to you all in case you want to take a moment to look at your bell schedule and your academic calendar, just to ensure that at a minimum you're meeting these instructional minutes here. Okay.
And while people are doing that, Barik, a couple of questions did pop up in the chat if you want to take a look at those.
Let's see. Take a moment here. Should we use a specific coding for emergency closure days? No, I don't think. I think as a generally speaking, you're just gonna have like all absences that day, and you'll know like what day you're closed, and the J13 form, like you'll put the date and time or the date in there with the backup. Usually it's like newspaper articles or like the district itself is closing, so you're just following suit. But you don't need to have that like the attendance code tracked for the emergency closure day. And I see here from Eduardo Mesa, for the traditional independent studies ratio calculated for charter schools, can you provide some context on how you would determine FTE for site-based when IS is only issued on an as-needed basis, not full-time teacher assignment here? I might need to reach out to you and take that one offline, because there is like the independent studies calculator that you reference here. But generally speaking, like what we do is we'll take all the IS for that was earned for the year, and then we'll essentially kind of do like a watered down calculation of how many FTEs we're actually providing services to the IS program. And at that point in time, we'll have like a ratio. And if you're not doing it and you're just kind of doing it as an as needed basis, there's probably like a 99% chance that you like adequately staffed and you're not going to get anywhere close to crossing that threshold there. Okay. And then I think Elizabeth said like you mark students as absent for the closure day or change the day to non-instructional day. So this is a follow-up question to the emergency closure. It's still an instructional day. You still mark those students absent. You technically can't like claim it as ADA until you get the approval from state board. So the J13 process is like you're actually requesting that they make an exception for the day that you closed. So until you get the authorization from the state, it's going to just stand as an absent, like it's a regular school day. The students and all the students that were there, you just don't mark them absent. And not until the State Board of Education approves your J13 form that you can kind of just disregard all of the attendance codes that you collected that day. Okay. So you I think generally you just kind of treat it as a regular day in terms of data collection. And then when you go through the J13 process and you get the approval from the state, then you can kind of treat it differently. But that's more of like a conservative answer, because what if the state doesn't approve your J13 form? Or like we haven't had that scenario happen for the schools we work with, but they don't approve your J13 form request, then that stands as like an absence for all of your students that day. Okay. All right. I think I want to take a moment to kind of go through here. So ADA allocation here, what we have here is just a countywide, this is just more of a special case. So if you have a countywide charter approved charter and you're operating that way, you're going to have to collect ADA by district of residence. We did see, although there's this particular slide here states that it's only for countywide charters approved. Like we did see an email from the CDE asking County Office of Ed to provide reports that state that kind of give some detail around how students are moving within the county. So how are they moving from district to district schools, district to charter schools? Like, so chances are, based on that particular email, we're still going to have to, at a minimum, like track district of residence data for your students, because that data is going to be used differently. It just wouldn't need to be reported on the PADC website. Okay. And then we have chronic absenteeism here. This is a California dashboard indicator for schools. It's one of the state priorities, like 10 priorities in terms of engagement. So if students don't come to school, they're not getting the benefit of your education program. You're not getting the benefit of the funding to support your education program. It's kind of like a lose-lose scenario here. So the state measures this particular indicator, key performance indicator, by determining if a student, if they were present at or enrolled at your school for at least 31 days, and if they were absent for 10% or more of those days, right? So if 31 days, if they were absent for 4 days, that student is going to be listed as a chronically absent student at your school. And this is for like the entire school year. This is data that gets submitted through CalPAD's end of year, but it is collected by the folks on this call who oversee, all the attendance programs and such here. But just know that, if you have high chronic absenteeism, then that's more like, hey, an engagement question, and you may get from your authorizers questions around like, why is engagement so low and so forth. Or if you're doing really well, the opposite question of how are you able to maintain such high level of engagement with your student population. But the numbers here in terms of how a student is calculated as being determined to be chronically absent is, they're enrolled at your school for at least 31 days, and they were absent for 10% of those days or more. And that would be considered a chronically absent student. Okay. So that's kind of more on the performance management side of things. And here, just kind of just a quick, just more like we're getting into some of the reference data points here, just, procedures. So, do you have your office staff procedures? You have your teacher, counselor procedures and such, who is responsible for what? As enrollment changes, we just want to make sure that like you all schools are aware and are properly staffed to ensure that like ADA or attendance records are changed in a timely manner, because it's really hard to say like at the end of the month what happened with this student 3 weeks ago. So there's probably a window in where the details of that particular event tend to like get diluted because of the passing of time. And you want to kind of make those changes quickly so that you don't lose any of the details associated with that particular transaction there. Codes and definitions here, we have just again allowable excuses. Some schools are like, I got this parent excuse, this letter, I don't know if it kind of fits into an excusable absence or what have you. So, the CDE or there's ed code around what are acceptable excused absence reasons. There is kind of like a catch-all on like section number 7 on this law here, that if the rules listed or the excuse types listed there don't kind of fit your scenario, like you can go through and get it like either like board approved, or like the principal can approve it, and then you just have to have like a paper trail indicating that the principal said that this is an excused absence category or type here. Yeah. And then I think this is like second to last slide here, and it's just your authorizers and your reporting. So we work with, this is a snapshot of what some of the schools we work with in LUSD, and they LUSD says like we want all the reports every month. These are the 20-day instructional segments. Please share it. Please make sure that you have your monthly reports reconciled the week after the reporting period. So if you have something like this is actually like it's not LUSD, it's actually best practices that are shared by the State Board of Education, or the CDE. And what they share is that like in the in their actual like workbook or handbook, like it's best practice to reconcile your attendance at least on a monthly basis here. Yeah. I went through a lot of information here, but I did, again, like kind of circling back to the original intent of this presentation here, was just to kind of share some of the learnings that we've gathered over the past year, some of the things that we are prepping our schools with so that they can have a successful year with collecting attendance, making connections with internal program managers so that they can ensure the data that they're reporting is going to potentially be like audit free, and just helping out the community so that we have a great 23-24 school year here. So that's the end of the presentation here, and I can kind of take a moment to take any follow-up questions. But if you also want to have like a quick consulting session with me, just go ahead and email me there, and we can kind of dig in more deeply into some of the some of the topics that I covered on the presentation here. Okay, I think with that, I'll open up to the group. We have like a minute or two, but if not, we'll share this information out with you all. All right. We'll take a look at the chat here, and anyone who has follow-up questions will probably reach out to you directly. here, because we don't have too much time left here, but I will reach out to you all if you have any questions in the chat here.
We are getting a hard copy of the slides, correct?
Yeah, we're going to send out the presentation here to the group.
Thank you.
Okay, I think with that, just I want to thank everyone for their time and spending some time with me this morning. And I hope this was helpful. If not, reach out, and happy to help you dig into anything that you're trying to stand up at your school site here. Have a great rest of your morning.
Thanks, everybody.